The morning Nancy Guthrie disappeared began like any other ordinary day. The sun rose quietly over the neighborhood, birds chirped in the distance, and nothing about the peaceful scene hinted that within hours, a mystery would unfold that would leave an entire community shaken. Nancy Guthrie was not a celebrity, not someone surrounded by controversy or danger. She was known simply as a kind, devoted woman who loved her family and lived a quiet life. But sometimes the most chilling stories begin in the most ordinary places. And what happened to Nancy Guthrie would soon leave investigators confused, frightened, and desperate for answers. Nancy had stepped out that morning expecting to return home like she always did. She had errands to run and plans for the day ahead. Friends and neighbors would later say she seemed perfectly normal, smiling, calm, and completely unaware that something dark was about to happen. But somewhere between her routine tasks and her return home, Nancy simply vanished. At first, her family thought it might be a misunderstanding. Maybe her phone battery had died. Maybe she had stopped somewhere unexpectedly. Hours passed, and when Nancy still hadn't returned, worry slowly turned into panic. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left with no reply. By evening, her loved ones knew something was terribly wrong. Soon, the police were involved, and what started as a missing person report quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. Officers searched the area where Nancy was last seen. Surveillance cameras were checked, neighbors were questioned, and every possible lead was followed. But the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the situation became. Then came the moment that changed everything. Nancy's family received a message. At first glance, it appeared to be exactly what authorities feared, a communication from kidnappers. But what made the message truly shocking was not its existence. It was what the message did not contain. There was no demand for money, no ransom, no instructions. For most kidnapping cases, the motive is painfully clear. Criminals take someone because they want something in return, usually money. But in Nancy's case, the kidnappers seemed to want something else entirely, or perhaps something far more disturbing. Investigators were baffled. Why would someone kidnap a person without asking for anything? The message itself was brief and cryptic, offering almost no clues about who was responsible or what they wanted. It was as if the kidnappers were sending a signal rather than negotiating. Nancy's family was left in emotional agony. Each passing hour felt unbearable. Her loved ones held on to hope, but the uncertainty was devastating. Friends gathered, volunteers joined search teams, and the entire community began looking for any sign that Nancy was still alive. As the investigation intensified, detectives began examining Nancy's life more closely. They looked into her work, her relationships, her daily habits, and any possible conflicts she might have had. But nothing immediately stood out. By all accounts, Nancy lived a peaceful and stable life. Yet someone had taken her, and someone had sent that strange message. Days turned into sleepless nights for investigators. Theories started forming, each one more unsettling than the last. Was this a targeted kidnapping? Was Nancy chosen for a reason that only the kidnappers understood? Or was something else happening behind the scenes, something far more complicated? Then a new development shook the case. A witness came forward. The person claimed to have seen a suspicious vehicle near the area where Nancy was last spotted. The description was vague, but it was enough for police to begin tracking possible leads. Surveillance footage from nearby streets was reviewed again, this time focusing on vehicles matching that description. Slowly, a timeline began to take shape. Investigators believed Nancy may have been approached or followed shortly before she disappeared. But even with this information, the biggest question remained unanswered. Why? If the kidnappers wanted money, they would have demanded it by now. If the kidnapping was personal, there should have been signs of conflict. But the silence from the kidnappers continued, and that silence was perhaps the most terrifying part of the entire case. Meanwhile, Nancy's family made emotional public appeals, asking anyone with information to come forward. In interviews, their voices trembled with fear and hope. They spoke about Nancy's kindness, her love for her family, and how desperately they wanted her back home. Every tip that came in was investigated. Some were promising, others led nowhere. But the case refused to reveal its true story. Then investigators discovered something that made the situation even more unsettling. The message sent to Nancy's family may have been carefully designed to mislead them. Digital experts analyzed the communication and found signs that it had been sent through methods intended to hide the sender's identity completely. Whoever was responsible had taken serious steps to avoid being traced. This was not a random act. It was planned. That realization sent chills through the investigation team. They were no longer looking at a simple kidnapping. They were dealing with someone who had thought through every detail, someone who understood how to stay hidden. And yet, the biggest mystery still lingered. If this crime was so carefully planned, what was the end goal? The lack of a ransom demand suggested something far more disturbing than financial motives. Some investigators quietly began considering darker possibilities, motives that had nothing to do with money at all. As the days passed, tension grew. The community followed every update closely. Rumors spread online. People speculated about suspects, motives, and hidden secrets. But for Nancy's family, this was not just a story on the news. It was their life. Their mother, their sister, their loved one was gone. And somewhere out there, someone knew exactly what had happened. The case of Nancy Guthrie had officially become one of the most puzzling investigations in recent memory. A kidnapping without a ransom. A message without answers. A disappearance that made less sense the more investigators looked into it. But one thing was certain. Mysteries like this rarely stay hidden forever. Somewhere, a clue was waiting to be discovered. Someone somewhere knew the truth. And when that truth finally comes out, it may reveal a story far more shocking than anyone ever expected.